New Delhi, 1975. The air smelled of dust and sweat, the streets pulsed with life, rickshaws jostling for space, beggars murmuring blessings, and street vendors shouting out deals like battle cries. In the middle of this chaos, a young man sat quietly on a ragged stool near Connaught Place. His name? Pradyumna Kumar Mahanandia. But everyone just called him PK. A sheet of blank paper rested on his lap. In his hand, a stick of charcoal, his sword. With a few quick strokes, he could pull a soul out of shadows. He didn't draw faces, he resurrected them. But that day wasn't like the others. A figure approached him, tall, blonde, with ocean blue eyes that seemed to question the world and love it all the same. Her name was Charlotte Von Schedvin, a Swedish aristocrat seeking spiritual clarity in India. She had heard whispers about a man who could sketch life itself. And now, here he was, her. When she sat down in front of him, time hiccuped. He looked at her, and something ancient stirred. Her features reminded him of a prophecy his mother once told him. You will marry a girl from a faraway land, from a place where trees are silver and snow kisses the ground. At the time, he had laughed. But now, charcoal in hand and heart pounding, he began to draw her. Each line he traced was a whisper of destiny. Each shadow was a secret unraveled. When he finished, she gasped, not because of the sketch's accuracy, but because of the electricity that hummed between them. They spoke. Awkward at first, but then laughter spilled and silences grew soft. Neither knew it yet, but this was no portrait. It was a beginning. Love doesn't always ask for permission. In the following days, PK and Charlotte wandered through the noisy alleyways of Delhi, hand in hand, two souls from opposite worlds, speaking a shared language the world couldn't quite hear. She took rickshaw rides with him, tried spicy street snacks that made her eyes water, and laughed louder than she had in years. He introduced her to his favorite quiet spots, temples where bells sang to the gods, parks where peacocks wandered like royalty, and narrow rooftops where the city looked like a galaxy of lanterns. But behind her laughter, a ticking clock loomed. Charlotte's visa was expiring. Her spiritual journey was coming to an end. Sweden called her back, but neither of them could bear the thought of goodbye. And so one evening, under a canopy of stars, surrounded by candlelight, incense, and the soft rustle of tree leaves, they stood before a small gathering of friends and strangers, and married. There was no priest, no contract, just a garland of marigolds, tied hands, and vows whispered through trembling smiles. It wasn't about legality, it was about belief. In that moment, beneath ancient banyan trees and a sky filled with constellations older than kings, they made a pact. Two hearts promising to meet again, no matter what mountain stood between them. But life isn't a fairy tale, it tests all vows. When Charlotte's departure day arrived, she begged him to come with her. She offered him a flight ticket, pleaded with him to leave everything behind and join her in Sweden. But PK shook his head gently. There was pride in his eyes and something unshakable. I'll come to you, he said, my own way. She boarded the plane, and just like that, the color drained from his world. But the journey had only just begun. The days after Charlotte left were the quietest of PK's life. Her absence wasn't just emotional, it was spatial. The air no longer moved the same. The streets he once loved now felt like strangers whispering behind his back. The charcoal in his fingers grew heavier with each passing hour. Portraits stopped looking like people. He wasn't sketching souls anymore, he was chasing a ghost. But, in that stillness, something hardened inside him. He remembered her final words before she boarded the plane. Write to me. Every week. And he did, at first. But eventually, letters weren't enough. One evening, he stood before the mirror and asked himself a question most men never dare to. What are you willing to sacrifice for love? He looked down at his hands, calloused from drawing, from surviving. Then his eyes fell on the thing that had carried him through poverty, caste discrimination, and loneliness, his bicycle. A rusted blue frame, slightly crooked handlebars, patched tires, his old companion through Delhi's chaos. Suddenly, the unthinkable became the only path. He would ride it. To Sweden, from India to Sweden. 7,000 kilometers, no digital maps, no GPS, no embassy approval, just a hand-drawn route, a small bag, a worn passport, and the fire of a promise burning in his chest. Everyone thought he was mad. His neighbors laughed. Friends warned him he would die. One said, "You'll be robbed before you leave India." Another joked, "Love doesn't feed you when you're starving in the Afghan desert." But PK didn't flinch. His mother had told him he was destined for something greater. Charlotte was the proof. And so, in early 1978, he kissed his mother's forehead, strapped his satchel to the back of his bike, and pedaled into the unknown, not toward a place, but toward a vow. The first leg of the journey was deceptively calm until the borders arrived. Leaving India, PK entered Pakistan, a land still tense from decades of historical wounds. Crossing on a bicycle wasn't common. Most travelers used trains, buses, or planes. A lone Indian man on a rickety cycle raised more than eyebrows. At the border checkpoint, guards stared in disbelief. "Where are you going?" one asked, half laughing. "To Sweden," PK replied calmly. The guard blinked. "On that?" "Yes," he smiled. They let him through, mostly out of curiosity. But as he moved deeper into Pakistan, the curiosity turned into suspicion. One night, in the town of Quetta, he was stopped by local police who thought he might be a spy. He was interrogated for hours. His only defense? A bundle of letters from Charlotte and the hand-drawn portraits he carried in his satchel. One officer, moved by the sketches, whispered to him in Urdu, "True love is rare. Go before the world stops you." But danger was just beginning. Afghanistan welcomed him with its stunning mountains and ruthless terrain. There were days he pushed the bike more than he rode it. Roads vanished into rubble. Rivers flooded the dirt tracks. A sandstorm near Kandahar nearly blinded him. His lips cracked. His shoes fell apart. He stitched them back with thread from a local bazaar. Still he pressed on. He shared tea with strangers who offered no words, only kindness. He painted portraits for bread. He slept under the stars, under bridges, under threat. And every night, when the cold wrapped around him like a second skin, he clutched Charlotte's last letter and read the part he loved most. "I believe in you. Come find me." Every mile hurt. Every muscle screamed. But he kept going, because some roads aren't traveled with wheels, they're traveled with will. By the time PK reached Iran, his body was weathered, lean from starvation, skin burnt from desert suns, legs trembling like violin strings. But his spirit, it had never been clearer. Iran in 1978 was a nation on the verge of a storm. The Shah's rule was cracking. Revolution loomed in the alleys and bazaars. Soldiers eyed civilians suspiciously. Protest chants simmered under their breath. Into this chaos pedaled an Indian artist with a broken sandal, a faded satchel, and a dream. He entered Zahedan with nothing but a scribbled note in Farsi and a small drawing of a sunrise that he gave to a shopkeeper for directions. It worked. Kindness became currency. Art became his visa. But on the outskirts of Yazd, the desert nearly took him. A tire exploded mid-ride, throwing him violently onto sharp rocks. His elbows bled. His sketchbook flew into the wind. For the first time in weeks, he screamed, not from pain, but rage. He was alone, broken, stranded in the desert as sand whipped into his eyes. For a moment, he thought of turning back. The dream seemed ridiculous now. But just as quickly, he remembered something Charlotte had once said as they sat under a tree in Delhi. Real love walks toward the storm, not away from it. He ripped a piece of his turban and bandaged his arm. Then he walked for hours, pushing his bicycle until he reached a village. A mechanic there, puzzled by his story, repaired his tire for free. In return, PK drew the man's daughter a portrait. She hung it beside their family shrine. In Shiraz, he met a group of traveling students. They shared him food, stories, and a song that echoed through the ruins of Persepolis, about a man chasing his love across deserts. He was no longer alone. The world was beginning to believe in his journey. And the wind? The wind no longer whispered warnings. It whispered hope. The sun over Turkey hit different, sharper, colder, and less forgiving. As PK entered Turkish soil through the eastern border near Doğubeyazıt, snow clung to the mountaintops like ancient dust, and the winds no longer felt poetic. They bit through cloth. His light Delhi clothes offered no protection, but he couldn't afford new ones. The roads curled like snakes through valleys and ancient ruins. He often shared the road with trucks that sprayed icy mud across his face. Drivers honked, not in anger, but confusion. Who was this man? Who rode a bicycle into the snow? In Erzurum, he collapsed from fever. Locals found him lying next to his bike, delirious and trembling. A doctor, whose brother happened to study art, took him into his home. For 5 days, PK drifted in and out of fever dreams, some of Charlotte's face, some of his mother's voice, some of roads he hadn't yet seen. When he awoke, the doctor gave him soup and socks. The wife, a teacher, asked him why he hadn't just flown. He smiled weakly. Some promises, can't take shortcuts. He pushed on through Ankara, then Istanbul, where Europe finally greeted him across the Bosphorus. He stood at the edge of the Galata Bridge, staring west. The city lights shimmered on the water like fireflies. His fingers were numb. His shoes were torn again. He ate bread crusts tossed out by fishermen. He sold quick charcoal portraits for a lira or two. And when he had enough for a train ride, he refused. This journey must be whole, he whispered to himself. But the deeper he went into Europe, the colder it got, not just in weather, but in spirit. Language failed him, faces grew colder, borders became less forgiving. In Bulgaria, he was denied entry. He rerouted through Yugoslavia. Every detour was another test of his resolve, but he knew. Every obstacle between him and Charlotte only made his arrival mean more. Yugoslavia was not what he expected. The border guards in Serbia eyed PK's documents with confusion. An Indian man on a bicycle, with a Swedish address scribbled in pencil on folded paper. They nearly turned him back, but one younger officer, moved by the audacity of it all, stamped the passport without a word. No approval, just a look, a mix of pity and awe. Inside Yugoslavia, the roads were cracked like old skin. The towns were shadowed by cold concrete blocks. Propaganda posters flapped in the wind like warnings. And yet PK kept moving. Every pedal forward was a rebellion against the idea that some things are too far. In Belgrade, he was mugged. 3 men in an alley cornered him. They took his coins, ripped his coat, and shoved him to the ground. He curled over his satchel, protecting the one thing they couldn't steal: the letters, the portraits, the map. One man lifted a stone. But then something happened. An elderly woman appeared at the alley's edge, shouting in Serbo-Croatian. She threw a basket at them. Tomatoes exploded like red fireworks. The men scattered. She helped PK up, speaking words he didn't understand. But her hands were kind. She brought him home, gave him warm broth, and a blanket that smelled of cedar. Her son spoke English. "You travel far," he said. "But why?" "For love," PK replied, voice trembling. The son translated. The woman wept. She handed him a wool scarf, her late husband's. PK wore it through the rest of Yugoslavia like a badge of honor. In Slovenia, he faced snow again, but the scarf held warmth, not just physical, but emotional. proof that love, even in its strangest forms, could spark kindness in the unlikeliest places. He didn't just carry letters anymore, he carried stories. Crossing into Austria felt like arriving on another planet. The roads were smooth, the buildings pristine, but the stairs were sharper than the cold. PK, brown-skinned and weather-worn, was a stranger in a land of order and quiet suspicion. He passed through villages where windows closed as he approached, and storekeepers watched his every move. No one smiled. He tried offering portraits in the parks of Salzburg, but most refused to sit. Some ignored him completely. His charcoal fingers began to tremble, not from fatigue, but from the invisible weight of being unwelcome. In Munich, Germany, he was nearly arrested for loitering. A local accused him of begging. A police officer demanded identification and questioned his purpose. PK replied calmly, "I'm biking to Sweden to meet my wife." The officer blinked, caught off guard. "You married a Swede?" "Yes," PK said, reaching into his satchel to show Charlotte's photo. The man scoffed, but let him go. That night, PK slept in a train station bathroom. The heater didn't work, but he wrapped himself in that Serbian scarf and held her picture close. Still, Germany had its angels. In Nuremberg, a school teacher noticed him sketching a child's portrait in the park. She watched in silence, then approached and asked for one of her own. When he handed it to her, she gasped. "You must be a genius," she whispered. He shook his head, "Just a man in love." She invited him to dinner with her family. That night, over bread and soup, they listened to his story of Charlotte, the promise, the journey. Her husband, a quiet historian, said only one thing: "You're rewriting what it means to believe." When PK left the next morning, they gave him gloves and a new set of tires for his bicycle. Germany had tried to break him, but love kept mending the cracks. Denmark was the final threshold between him and Charlotte, between survival and collapse. By the time PK rolled into Copenhagen, his legs were machines, stripped of all softness. He was no longer the shy young artist from Delhi. He was something forged in fire and frost, in hunger and hope. But his body was close to failure. Denmark welcomed him with a fierce northern wind, the kind that cuts through wool and ambition alike. It snowed as he cycled through narrow coastal roads, each gust threatening to knock him over. His fingers stiffened, his lips split and bled. He sold his last portrait in Odense for a loaf of bread. Then the fever came. In a small fishing town, PK collapsed for the second time in the journey. His bicycle tipped beside him like a fallen comrade. Locals rushed to help, wrapping him in blankets and feeding him hot broth laced with cloves and ginger. A nurse, curious about the foreign man with charcoal-stained hands, listened to his story and wept quietly. "You must take the ferry to Sweden," she insisted. He refused. "The road must remain unbroken," he whispered. He recovered in 2 days, then took off again, pushing himself through sleet and slush toward Helsingør, where the ferry to Sweden docked. There, standing on the edge of Denmark with his bicycle caked in mud and ice, PK finally allowed himself one small mercy. He took the ferry across the Øresund Strait. The icy waters shimmered under grey skies. As the boat moved forward, he didn't blink. His mind held only one image: Charlotte. He had made it across nations, deserts, mountains and snowstorms. But one final stretch remained: Sweden, the last chapter, the end, and the beginning. When the ferry touched Swedish soil, it wasn't triumph that hit him first, it was fear. PK stood on the deck, frozen, as if Sweden might vanish if he blinked. His bicycle, now more rust than metal, groaned beneath him. His scarf was threadbare, his hands trembled, not from cold this time, but from the weight of the moment. He had come too far to believe it was real. He pedaled the final miles in silence. The forests of Sweden blurred past him, tall, silent guardians wrapped in snow. The roads were wide, empty, eerily perfect. At one point, he paused to watch a deer step across the path. The world seemed to hold its breath with him. Charlotte's last letter was folded in his pocket. He'd memorized every word. By the time he reached Boros, her town, it was dusk. Orange light spilled across the sky like a blessing. He stopped outside a white house, heart hammering louder than any storm he'd faced. He knocked. The door opened slowly, and there she was. No music played, no birds sang, just silence and the soft sound of her breath catching in her throat. For a moment, they said nothing. Then she ran to him, throwing her arms around his shoulders. Tears fell like spring rain. She touched his face as if to be sure he wasn't a dream. "You came," she whispered. "I told you I would," he said. They married again, this time legally, surrounded by her family. He became a respected artist in Sweden, a father, a husband, a citizen. But none of that compared to what he had already achieved. Not every love story begins with a kiss. Some begin with a bicycle, a vow whispered under trees, and a road that tries to break you at every turn. But in the end, love didn't just win. It arrived.